All right, I'd like to introduce Ashley Giles. Ashley is our secretary, also our team leader for our integrated water management plan for Clear Creek. Ashley.
Thank you. We could also put the email address in the chat if people didn't catch that. So I'm introducing Zeke, who's a friend of mine. You guys might recognize Zeke from last year. He came and spoke at one of our last in-person chapter meetings. He talked about floating the Colorado. I'll give you just a little bit of background on Zeke. He's a person that doesn't really need much of an introduction. He's been around for quite a while in the fishing industry in Colorado. He is originally from Illinois, but grew up in Washington State and came out to Colorado in the early 90s, I think to be a snowboarding bum, but I'm not sure. Is that right?
Got it, yep.
Yep. He's been in Breck for a long time. He worked at the Mountain Angler up in Breck when he first got here in the 90s. And then after a few years, he started his own fly shop, the Blue River Anglers. And that was in 1997. He owned it until 2014. So had quite a long run with Blue River. If you're familiar with the shop, it started out in Breck and then moved to Frisco in 2002. In any case, he decided he wanted to do something different after a while, and so he sold the shop and became a firefighter and also became a captain. So he's a saltwater captain. And in 2018, Trouts, who then owned the shop and still does, asked Zeke to come back and manage the shop. So he's the regional general manager of Trouts Frisco. And I think you also manage the outfitting. Yeah. So he does all the guide and outfitting stuff out of Trouts. And one interesting thing about fly shops that Zeke shared with me is that, you know, the important thing about having a fly shop is not just to have the shop with all the guides and all of the stuff, the merchandise, but you also have to have the permits. And that was one thing that Zeke really did well, is establish some good relationships with local waters and hang on to some of those permits that now Trouts benefits from. So they always have great places to fish. Highly recommend them. And I asked Zeke to share with me something that maybe other people don't know about him. And he said that he always tries to fish left-handed. He's a right-hander, but he tries to fish left-handed when he gets a chance. And I will tell you from personal experience, he's a very good double haul teacher. And so without further ado, Zeke Hersh.
How's it going, folks? I'm going to share the screen right now, and then we'll get into it. How's that look, guys? Looking good? All right, good deal. So great introduction there, Ashley. I really appreciate that. And yeah, everything in there is true. So we're going to talk about Summit County and beyond, high country winter fly fishing, really just all of what Colorado has to offer. And we're in a special state. You know, one of the reasons why I'm still here 28 years later. So it's just a special place where you can fish year round. And that's comes to the next point. Yes, Trouts fly fishing, regional general manager up in Frisco and outfitting manager. Been guiding in Colorado for 20 years. But that brings us to the point, 365 days of access. So we have fishing. It's snowing right now up here in Frisco, but you could go fishing right now on the Blue River. So if you wanted to, you could go fish right down on the tailwater, not far from my shop here, 5 minutes. But things we have to do is winter weather. We have to think about is winter weather. We got this winter storm coming through here. We also think about wind. And then even probably the hardest thing is those winter driving conditions. So when I'm planning, I'm looking at all of this stuff in trying to keep away from those hazardous routes. For instance, talking with a friend yesterday about how gnarly it can be driving from Fairplay to Buena Vista. If you want to go fish the Arkansas and you're coming up 285, or that's the way you're going through Breck, you know, put that in your bank that you potentially are going to have, if it's windy, some low visibility situations. And I've been stuck on that road hoping nobody's going to ram into you or you're going to ram into somebody. So those are the, you know, a couple things to think about. And then winter fishing conditions, what you're going to see out there. First of all, just with that weather, we're going to have some exposure to that wind. You also got to think about if you're fishing the Dream Stream with that wind, there is no trees out there. The one good thing about the Dream Stream is you can get your back to the wind because there's always a bend that you can get away from it. One thing a lot of other people don't think about is inversions. Fishing the Colorado River up in the partial area, look at your weather, because a lot of times it might say it's going to be 30 in Silverthorne, and if you look at Kremling and it says it's -2, that's a surefire inversion right there. And usually it's just cold getting stuck down by the river, and it's, if you've never seen it, it's quite interesting. And if you've accidentally ran into it and wanting to fish, it's pretty much, you're like, I want to go back to the blue, and the blue is always usually a little colder. So, and then things I'm looking for too is lower altitude. Love to fish the Arkansas this time of year. It's one of my favorite fishing places in the winter. Actually, Ashley and I have fished there right about this time of year last year and did pretty good. And then, you know, people were mountain biking, so it's a kind of a neat area to go check out. So I'm always looking for low altitude, as well as like fishing in Glenwood Springs, stuff like that. Just get away. For me, it's also just a time to go in the winter to get away from the snow in the cabin and head out and see some dirt possibly. Canyons are something to think about. I tend to stay away from canyons, mostly because there's not a lot of sun in those canyons. And so usually that makes for colder fishing for your hands and yourself. And then also those fish, you know, have a smaller window to eat. So a lot of times those fish will kind of hightail it out of the canyons in the wintertime. As they feel winter coming, they'll get out of those canyons. And then another good thing to think about is ice flow. If you're seeing temperatures in the teens in where you're wanting to go, and it's not a tailwater and it's a freestone, there's a good chance you're going to see ice flow. So these are all things that you're doing, checking those weather maps. You know, a good thing too that I like to look at is weather cams. Not weather cams, but just cameras on Glenwood. I mean, there's cameras everywhere these days, for good and bad, obviously. But if you want to see what the lower Colorado is, you know, looking like, you can look at the camera at the Glenwood Springs, and it's right at the kayak park. You can look at the river in Salida. You can put at the boat ramp in Salida. So some pretty cool things to look at. So these are things that I'm doing, especially when I'm doing a guided trip. If I'm fishing for myself, I'll maybe slack a little bit and not necessarily take all those precautions. But even then, I'm always looking for some fun. So, you know, looking at the cameras, looking at the weather, and then bank ice, something that can give you more access to the river, as far as you can walk out on the Colorado on the bank ice sometimes, but it's also can be very dangerous. So you can hear it crack or it can fall off. So, you know, be cautious of that. Or even just getting in the river can be a small little bit of bank ice, and it's only a couple inches thick or even that, and just trying to get off that ice into the water to actually wade can be a pretty serious scenario. And then anchor ice, which is dealing basically with either that actual bank ice going out to the middle of the river and then actually, you know, grabbing all the way to the rocks, and that can pull the bugs out, other rocks. It can just, as it's melting, just cause a real hard way to get your flies to the fish. So those are things to think about that you might see when you're doing one of these winter fishing trips. And then something to think about is this winter accessibility. Is there deep snow? Tomorrow, when we wake up here in Summit County, if you want to go fishing on the Williams Fork, there's a good chance you're going to have to walk in maybe a foot of snow. And so that's going to be a pretty tough hike. And there you go. That's a pretty long hike too. That's a, 1.5 mile, 2 mile hike in. And whether or not you want to do that in a foot and a half of snow. And then also thinking, we did talk about that bank ice, if you're fishing in pump house and you're going to deal with bank ice, more than likely, you're not going to be able to access the river too many places too easily in the middle of winter without walking on bank ice. That said, you can walk on that bank ice on the Colorado pretty close to the edge, which is quite crazy. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do that. And then things you also got to think about is road closures. Who knows? I-70 could close tonight. It was pretty bad driving earlier this afternoon. Closures in from Copper to Officers Gulch. So you got to keep looking at that. Look at the CDOT page, and I've definitely been rerouted too, coming back from floating on the Colorado as a winter storm. Still fully nice down in Glenwood, or nicer, and then you get to Vail Pass or Vail and they're closing and you have to reroute through Leadville. So something to think about, or even the trough road. So and then winter closures, some streams do close, but not many in Colorado have seasonal closures. But just make sure, check into that and make sure you're in the clear. And or some streams definitely freeze. So, ask your local fly shops, look at the flows online. That site has changed a lot lately. So some of those water gauges are no longer, but for the most part, you can find and see, and again, look at those cameras. Those are a super good resource too. So if you're not seeing great flow data, look at one of those cameras, and there's a ton of cameras out there. Something I really like using. So then we come to that, know before you go and make those good chances or choices. You don't want to know if you got a winter storm coming through, maybe Vail Pass is going to close and go into the lower Colorado might not be the best option. So that's those are some of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm preparing for a guide trip. And then you got a lot of options in Colorado. We're really lucky with tailwaters, local tailwaters, a ton of them really. Blue River's 5 minutes from here in my shop here in Frisco. Fish is good all winter long, and usually you can fish, to the town limits at least, and if not a little below that. As you get farther out of town, those fish are a little more sluggish. That water gets cold, and you also see some ice flow, if not icing up all the way. We talked about the Williams Fork, below Williams Fork Reservoir. Great section of stream. Did some stream work to it this past year. I have not been able to look at it, but it's one of my favorite streams to go fish. It's not an easy fishery, but the fish are quite nice in the Williams Fork, and it's pretty rewarding when you catch a fish in this river, because after you've spent a little time on there how actually hard it can be. South Platte below Spinney Mountain Reservoir, or the Dream Stream, a phenomenal fishery as well. Right now it's, getting ready to see those lake run rainbows and cutthroats. And, it's a good time to check it out. That said, there's a ton of people because they know that. But there's 3 miles, something like that, maybe more of river between 11 Mile Reservoir and Spinney Reservoir. It's a, great place to go walk, and not every day's busy. And if you don't mind walking to the middle where nobody fishes, it can fish you can find some little sleeper holes that nobody even knows about. Taylor River below Taylor Reservoir, not easy to get to. You're going to be driving a ways this time of year. Cottonwood's not open, so you're going to go over Monarch and then up through Gunnison, heading towards Crested Butte, and then up the Taylor River to the reservoir. But this is the time of year that I prefer to fish it, just because there's less people. I went there one time this summer/fall, and it was so busy. It was just pretty unenjoyable. So downstream, we fished and found a bunch of public access doe, and actually had a really good day on dry flies. So it was super fun. Frying Pan below Ruidai, most people know about that. Frying Pan's a little cold too. It's in the canyon, as is the Taylor. So those are things to think about. They are kind of shaded from the sun, so you're going to be cold. So you're going to want to bring all the warm stuff that you have, because even if the if it looks like a wind day or a warm day, and you're gonna probably still be in the shadows. So those are a couple things to think about. So those are tailwaters. And then we got some freestones, which are going to be free-flowing, snowmelt dependent streams. Some of my favorites are the Arkansas River, the Eagle, the Lower Colorado, the Roaring Fork. Most have tailwaters as tributaries, but for the most part, they are freestones. And with that tailwater, though, those couple tailwaters, for instance, like the Colorado has the Williams Fork, so it keeps it open for a little bit there at the partial area. But then also the Lower Colorado with the frying pan going to the Roaring Fork, and then the Roaring Fork going to the Colorado, that helps keep that Lower Colorado open. And then the Arkansas has Twin Lakes, that outlet there, and that keeps that Arkansas River flowing pretty good. Eagle River is pretty much it does have a release from Homestake Reservoir, but doesn't really do anything for that river. So those are some of my favorites there that are local here to Summit County. And I really do like fishing freestones just because you don't have to fish as small of bugs. Even in this picture, you can see standing on that bank ice, you might be able to say that like that water's got a little color to it. So you can use a little bigger bugs, a little bigger tippet. And then we do actually have a few Spring Creek options in Colorado, and that's just basically water coming up from underground. Basically that water temp is going to be a little bit warmer than that air temp, and that's going to keep it from freezing. On the flip side, it's going to be colder in the summer, so that's another good area to fish, and that's why you see a lot of people fishing those in the summer, and growing some large fish. So and then a couple here in Colorado, Trout Creek, running right along the highway on Trout Creek Pass, and it's a small stream, super small, but there, you know, you can middle of winter pull off. There's a couple good pull offs that follow the dirt road, follows that creek, and there's quite a bit of access. So pretty cool little thing where you can fish dry flies in the winter, in the middle of winter, and catch brookies, browns, rainbows. And then, you know, it's not technically a Spring Creek, but that Upper Blue River by Breckenridge. A lot of people don't think about it or fish it, but you know, back in the late 80s, Summit County, town of Breckenridge came in, relined the Blue River from the damage done by all the tailing or the dredge boats and the tailing piles. Basically, that river was just going under all these rocks. If you think about it as putting a bunch of marbles in the bathtub and then filling it with water, you're just going to mainly see those marbles on top. So that's basically what was happening to the river. It was just flowing underground, and did that for many years. And they came back in and lined the river. But when they did that, there's still a few sections where water escapes underground, and then you'll actually be able to fish certain areas and see it when you're walking up in there, and you'll actually see it coming back from underground and bubbling up. And there's a few places where you can just literally see the amount of fish stacked in those areas where that little bit of warmer water comes up in the wintertime. Really unique. It's a super neat, unique area, actually. It's for years, it actually at 4 Mile, I think it's called 4 Mile Bridge, had actually still flowed. And so if you fish this area, because all that water goes underground and comes bubbling up, it's when you fish it and walk in your waders, you'll smell a unique smell, just an earthy, unique smell. And that's from so much water going underground. Also, the town of Breckenridge has a wastewater treatment, plant where it's releasing that clean water back in there. That's also a little bit warmer. So another option in there, giving it a bunch of life, tons of life on that section, more so than the blue below Dillon, and it's got a ton of wild trout. Super neat area. It's small stream, but highly recommend checking it out. And, Summit County Open Space just did a big restoration. It's not open yet, but there's going to be a ton of miles of water to fish from Airport Road down to basically 4 Mile Bridge. it's just it's going to be an easement. So you got to, and it's not open yet. So I do know the Swan, which is another tributary just right around that same area. They opened last year, that restoration project, and I've had great reports from it. So, so looking forward to that. And again, a little bit of a kind of cool little sleeper spot, Spring Creek in Colorado. And, we talked about weather, and we'll kind of go back on it. This report is a little bit redundant, and I was going to clean it up, but I just didn't feel like it was worth it. So, weather in Colorado, we can fish 365 days a year. I like to pick my days and locations though. Like tomorrow, it's going to be deep and snowy. And if I had a guide trip, I'd probably still go guiding, but I'll probably go get some powder shots in the morning and then come to work. So, negative single digits, probably not going to go for that on my own, but I have taken people fishing in those negative digits. And one of the craziest days I've ever seen was on the Dream Stream in like -6 degrees. The folks were from Michigan or Wisconsin, and they told me that they deal with that all the time, cold temperatures. And we went there, and there was just fish boiling everywhere. So pretty cool. Sometimes these tailwaters with that warmer water than the air temp, and especially in weird, when it's a big spread like that, -6 to that river's running 36 maybe, just spurs a midge hatch, and you'd have tons of midges hatching and tons of fish rising to them. So pretty cool. And then, check your 10 days forecast. I'm looking at not only for storms coming in for, skiing, but I'm looking at my fishing trips and, if it's going to be a warm day to float the lower Colorado below Glenwood, or if it's going to be a super warm day on the Arkansas, and I'm looking to find and pinpoint those so I can have a comfortable day and fun day on the water. And then look at all your potential areas that you want to fish, especially as you're pinpointing those warming days and keeping away from those negative digits and all that good stuff. As you're checking that weather, you're checking for the high and the low for the day. So I'm doing the fishing reports lately, and I'll look through the 10-day forecast and be, like today it's really warm. You guys were in 60s, I think, and now you're going to get snow later tonight. We were in like the 30s, if not 40s, and then a very quick change happened, and we're getting all this snow. And then we're going to wake up to probably a high of, or it's going to get in the teens tonight and then be a high of 20 tomorrow. And then it's going to stay pretty cold for a few days. So those are things I'm looking at. And then as we get through that, it's going to warm back up and we'll be in the 30s, lows in the 20s. So, I would probably say it's the next few days is not the best options for fishing, at least around here. And then that potential for snow, obviously the next few days, and actually the next 10 days, we've got snow in the forecast almost every day, but the next 4 days are going to be the big days. And, it's driving more than anything. You don't want to go out and drive in sketchy conditions and deal with other people potentially crashing and whatnot. And then I'm checking the wind on that weather. A lot of times people always look at the weather and forget to look at that wind. One of my favorite weather apps is the Weather Underground, because it's got little weather stations stationed all around in various towns, and you never know, it allows you to search the town and where it's going to be. And it actually will give you like it's pretty accurate, give you wind for the day. There's a lot of other wind apps out there that you can look at too. And with all of that in mind, you're going to pick that best option. And this might not only always be the warmest option, because it might have a lot of wind. So you're like, oh, it's going to be 40 in Hartselle. Oh, but there's, 20 to 30 mile an hour winds. So probably want to stay away from that, where it might be 35 in Salida, but it's going to be, hidden from that wind. So that might be the best option. So, and also might not be the spot with the least amount of snow. That snowy area might get warmer than the other areas, or not have an inversion. So really using weather to pinpoint what I'm thinking is going to be the best option. And also, if I'm fishing the Dream Stream, if it's horrible out there, if you some places have audibles or, options, and, from the Dream Stream, I can rally over to the Arkansas. That's not that far if I have time and, you know, I can make that change. So, you know, some places you can't, you know, if you're fishing partial area, you might be able to catch fish on the pump house, but you know, you're kind of rolling the dice there. So think about that too, having other options. Or, you know, if you're fishing Hartselle and you want to go fish Trout Creek, it's not far at all, and that's a spring creek, and you know you're going to have a nice flow there. And then, you know, like we talked about winds, look at that wind. This could also cause some serious wind chill and make for an uncomfortable day. So I'm always looking at those winds and, you know, how fast they're going to be blowing. It's just uncomfortable fishing in the wind. I'm sure we've all done it, and it's just some days you have to deal with it, and especially if as a guide, you know that you're going to have to deal with it. But if you don't have to, it's my least favorite thing to fish in. So, and then one thing to think about too is when it is snowing, sometimes snow actually triggers some great dry fly fishing. I've had some great days on the upper Colorado in the partial area where the fish think the snowflakes are midges hatching, and they're actually hitting the water to snowflakes. And you throw a little dry fly on there, and you'll be catching fish on dries all day long. So not necessarily a snow bad as well. So, and then look at your potential driving routes, and if it's potential for hazardous weather situations. We talked about that section from Fairplay to Buena Vista can be super, super bad, as well as Highway 9 to Kremlin from Silverthorne. If you're going up to Partial, a lot of times I'll take Ute Pass just to get off Highway 9, just because there's so many people heading to Steamboat. And you know, I myself last year got in a head-on accident there. Guy came in my lane, and you know, it was super scary. And I've seen cars with luggage strewn about, you know, so I try to get off of that road whenever there's serious weather. So put all these factors into which destination we'll be heading to, and then we'll go to the next step. And then flows. So another thing besides weather, I'm always checking the flows, usually kind of going through that checklist, flows, and then we'll talk about like what you got in your car for your gear or in your pack. So winter usually presents minimal flow situations on all of Colorado tailwaters. So you'll be fishing skinny water to picky trout. But it can be pretty good fishing. I fished the tailwater below the Yampa, or below Stage Camps on the Yampa. Super small water, but tons of fish in there, and it fished really good. And that was just a couple days ago. But again, 36 CFS. The blue's at 50 right now. So if there are releases, and this is kind of what you're looking for when you're getting preparing, is, you know, and we're always doing flows every week and looking for any jumps and flows. If they jump a flow on the Blue River, expect really good fishing. So you see a jump in flows, that's, you know, that Mices fishing is going to be pretty good. Mices and midge on the Blue, or the Taylor, or the Frying Pan. So always keeping an eye on those jumps in flows. And we just got that kind of redundant there. So bumping flows, this is going to spike that feeding activity. And again, that Blue River's at 50 CFS, so super small water, not using a lot of split shot, small flies. But again, if you see those bumps and flows, get there, because it's going to be a good day of fishing. And then freestones, for the flows on freestones, just like tailwaters, wintertime means that the freestones are at their lowest flows for the year, with the lack of snowmelt entering the river system. There can be spikes with snowmelt in the springtime, but for the most part, winter will be low and consistent. So, you know, that can also, if it's super low, can also cause some freezing or ice flow. And I think we'll get to that here right now. So yeah, freestones, if running too low, can ice up. The Eagle, this was a while ago when I took that, but 120, I think it's even lower than that right now. So, and definitely the Eagle in most places is iced up right now. I mean, it still flows in certain areas, but you know, the lower, slower stuff definitely starts icing up. Spring spikes could also mean mud and color in the water. So that's something to think too. Just like checking the weather, checking the flows. Spikes on tailwaters are good. spikes on freestones, probably not so good because you're probably going to get some mud and color in the water. So, you know, those are a couple good things to think about. And then flows in spring creeks. Spring creeks will have also very little water coming in from snowmelt. So these will be running at their lowest in the winter months. This means usually, you know, very spooky fish in a spring creek. So very technical fishing and low water and wary trout. So fun fishing in the wintertime, but be prepared. They're going to be picky. Even dry fly fishing, they're going to be picky. All right, so let's see here. Time of day, is that what it says there? I can't see it on my screen. Let's see here. Let's see here. Yeah, time of day. So wintertime is the time of year to fish the middle of the day as the day warms. So I'm not getting out super early, but most of the time I'm still leaving my shop around 8. And I just like to, if I'm meeting people at the shop, I leave at 8. That means I'm typically on the water 9 or 9:30. You know, the other day we had a longer drive, so we met a little earlier. And you know, if you're fishing by 9 or 9:30, you're pretty good because then you're warming up as the day is warming up. You're getting the kinks out. You're maybe retying a couple patterns, trying to figure out what they're eating. And then as the day is hitting its stride at 11 or so, you're gonna start catching fish. You're gonna have figured yourself out and got the kinks out. And then the other thing is some places are busy, and so you want to be a little earlier. So, you know, or you leave earlier, or that's why a lot of times I leave at 8. Some people are like leaving at 9 or 10, getting there for the 11 o'clock. But if you're there a little earlier, you kind of warming up, get the good spots too, you know, and or people leave because they see you're already there. All right, doing some weird stuff on mine. Some colder temperatures to start the day usually, but as the day warms up, the fishing typically does too. So, you know, that's, again, I'm just looking for that warm up through the day, and I'll get out early because I know I'm gonna have to deal with it, but then I know it's gonna warm up. And then this is a great way to spend the day and catch a few fish. Fish activity usually start around 9 and can be good to 3 p.m. or so. So that's a good day anytime. All right, and then preparation. This is a factor most of us forget about, and as a guide, I'm trying to always, you know, have my stuff prepared, but also have my client's stuff prepared and ready. So dry and unfrozen waders. Even the other day, fishing with Scott, his waders were frozen, so he had to turn the car on and warm them up. So, you know, you never want to be out there trying to unfreeze your waders. And if it's going to be cold already, your feet are cold, and, you know, potential for frostbite or whatnot if you're putting on super already frosty waders. And then boot fit waders. Those are another good option if you're going to fish winter. One of my good friends just swears by buying an extra pair of waders and wearing boot fits. You got that extra little airspace in there, keeps your feet a little warm. The other nice thing that he liked to do is put electric socks in those boot fit waders. And, you know, even now in the ski industry, there's electric socks that can go in your ski boots. So super way to keep those toes cold. A lot of people always ask me, you know, how I deal with cold feet. And I basically just say, you got to just kind of forget about it. Have a short memory with that cold feet and just get through that. And, you know, most of the time you'll forget about it pretty quickly. A couple things you definitely want, I like to carry most of the time, is a puffy coat. Just keeps you warm, keeps you toasty as a guide. Sometimes I'm just sitting on the river tying rigs, and that just keeps me nice and comfortable because I'm not as active as the clients. Something I have been using too in the last couple of years, especially for float fishing, is puffy pants, because I'm not doing a ton of, you know, moving around besides rowing the boat and sitting. Those puffy pants are super nice. Sims makes a good pair, and highly recommend them. Plenty of layers, guys. You know, typical typical day, I'll be wearing like a bug stopper hoodie and then a nice Sims cold weather shirt, which has a layer of fleece in there, and then multiple other layers on top of that. And then if I'm wearing just regular, cold weather pants, they've got a fleece layer in there. I could wear some long johns under that as well. And then warm socks. Some people even swear by 2 socks. I know Tanner did the other day. I typically like to wear one pair just because they're not moving around in my boots so much. We talked about electric socks, and then you can't forget about those fingerless gloves or mitts. I don't like to fish in them, but if I have to, I will. More than anything, they're to keep my hands warm for tying knots. One thing, Scott Dixon, our head guy down in Denver, he's been swearing by bringing a dry small hand towel to dry your hands after you're handling fish. So kind of a cool idea, because you want to take their gloves off. Don't want to handle the fish with the gloves or you get them wet and then they're not going to do their job. But he'll handle the fish and then release the fish, dry his hands off in the glove, put his with the towel, and then he'll put his gloves back on. So cool little tip from Scott Dixon. So bring that little hand towel and then also your gloves, and then hand and feet warmers. Sometimes you'll forget about these too. But if on those super cold days, it's worth getting those hand and foot warmers. You can get them at most ski shops, and we sell them here at the fly shop here, and they're well worth it. Put a few in your bag, and on those cold days, just use them, and you'll even just having some in the pockets of your coat is just helps a ton. And I've definitely used them on my feet warmers on really cold days, and highly recommend them. And then you're going to want that small midge box, that small nymph and midge box. So that's a super key one. Small dry fly box, light tippet, split shot. Ice off paste, good question. I definitely use it once in a while. But a lot of times, if I know it's going to be really cold, I'll just actually use a quell, and I'll dress the front part of my line, front maybe 30, 40 feet, and with just a quell, and let it dry overnight. And I also put it on the guides on my fly rod, and it tends to work pretty well, and just basically keeps that water from sticking on that line and icing up as much. But ice on your guides is something you're going to have to deal with. One day, if we get lots of people fishing in the winter, I might come up with those heated guides. So you never know. Prepare a thermos of hot drinks or soup, always a key thing to have. I can't tell you how many times on guide trips that really just seals the day, whether you're float fishing or wade fishing. Lunch, water, super key. Some people don't eat lunch, but I love to have a lunch on the river, even in the middle of a cold day. And then definitely drink that water. Probably don't drink as much as you should just because it's so cold. I know the other day when we fished the Yampa, I definitely did not drink as much as I needed to. So, remember to hydrate even if you're not hot. You're getting beat up by the sun. That said, sunscreen too, chapstick, they're not on my list, but those are great things to have. And then maybe your favorite flask or a beer or two after you worked hard all day. It's always good to have a little celebration beer or nip on the flask. Then we'll get to flies. Some of my favorite flies, guys, in the wintertime, pheasant tails, can't go wrong. Size 16 to 24. 16s and 18s, I'll be maybe using as an attractor fly on some of your freestones, the Colorado, the Arkansas, and then those smaller flies can be a last little emerger, or flashback pheasant tail really is one of my favorites because that little small can look like a little batis or midge. Patch rubber legs, I still like these through the winter, especially if I'm float fishing on the Colorado. It's my weight. I prefer not to use, if I'm nymphing, I prefer not to use split shot off the boat when I'm float fishing because of the fact of the hangups and the snags in the Colorado. So I use a big patch rubber leg. Believe it or not, fish will eat it all winter long on the Colorado down there, and probably would eat it on the Arkansas and the Eagle. So it's one of my favorite flies to have in various different sizes. But typically I'm still using, like float fishing in the Colorado, I'm still using a pretty big one. Flashback tungstones, really one of my favorite flies, heavy stonefly pattern. Look kind of like a hare's ear with a flashback, but a little bit different. One of my favorites for sure. UV Sally, catch fish on this fly 12 months a year. It's such a good fly, looks really good in the water. The Colorado, a lot of the freestones. And then a fly that people don't know much about is the KGB, and it comes in black and blue and then tan. And both of the colors are awesome. That blue flashback on the black one is something very unique, and I don't think fish see it a lot. And I get fish to eat it in all sizes, all times a year. And then that tan, kind of on the lighter colored mayfly, or lighter colored hare's ear kind of zone there. But it's got like an orange flashback, again, a little bit different, or copper flashback, a little bit different flashback. And I, again, think it really attracts fish. That fly is also very sparsely tied, so it sinks real fast, and it's got a tungsten bead on it. Never can go wrong with eggs. Eggs actually caught quite a few, or beads caught quite a few fish the other day. This is my time of year for pink. I really like pink this time of year. And then worms, leeches, and of course, if you're fishing any of those tailwaters, the tailor, the frying pan, or the blue, you're gonna want some micey shrimp. Charlie's Mices is one of my favorites. Just very wispy tail, looks really good in the water. Looks like a piece of the Mices or a Mices. So the best, in my opinion, the best looking representation of the Mices. And flies continued. Black Beauty was probably my best fly the other day on the Yampa. It caught tons of fish, just a small Black Beauty. I kind of stay normal in a lot of my midge patterns. Miracle Nymphs, easy to tie to, guys. Everybody can tie these flies pretty easily. Neon Nightmare, Bling Midge, Cardinal Midge. Cardinal Midge is a solitude fly, comes in one of my favorites for the blue and the pearl color and black. Both fish really well. And then the Mighty Midge, new Matt McCannell fly, last couple of years, really good pattern in both colors. Black Beauty Emerger comes on a unique hook. It's a solitude fly, a little bit of a curved hook, and it comes a little smaller, down to 26. And sometimes I'll even cut the tuft off of the back there, and it does really well for picky trout when you need to go a little smaller on that midge. And then a couple, to not forget about is the Brassy or the Goldie. I say Goldie just because it's basically a Brassy tied with gold wire. Something I've done really well on the Blue River, and then also on the Taylor. And I like to tie it with a muskrat head as opposed to the peacock herl. And if you haven't tried it, it works pretty good. Highly recommend it. Just something those fish don't see. A lot of times, just a matter of that, and you can catch more fish. And then that tungsten zebra midge, hard to go wrong with that tungsten zebra midge. Black little tungsten zebra midge has been my go-to on the Arkansas recently. Been fishing really good. And then dry flies, there is definitely some good dry fly fishing. This is actually picture on this screen here. We were about ready to leave, and we came around the corner, and there's, I don't know, 50 or 60 fish rising. So we quickly stopped, tied on a dry fly, and I don't even remember how many fish we caught. But this is the Eagle, and I think that was in December, and really good fishing. It doesn't happen all day. The midge hatch is not going to happen usually all day, and you have to be looking for it. For instance, on the blue, there's a midge hatch in the middle of the day, but you won't see fish rising, only in a couple areas. So you have to keep your eyes open for it. And it sure can be fun though when you find that. And again, we were fishing downstream of this and just happened to come around the corner. Parachute Adams, 16 to like 24 is always a good pattern to fish. I think we were catching most of our fish on the Parachute Adams and like 22 to 24 on that day. Griffiths Gnats, the standard original. Great dry fly, great little midge dry. One of my favorite midges is the Brook Spout midge. I'll fish it in black and cream or even the gray. Those are my favorite colors. I think it comes in olive too, but I usually find those black, gray, or creams are the best. And then you never know, blue wing olives as well. We saw blue wings on the Yampa hatching just the other day, just on Monday. So obviously really small, but you never know. You can find those blue wing olive hatches. And here, as we're, I'm releasing probably a fishing report tomorrow, release for my mountain outlook. And this month is, we're not quite there, but it's sort of a transitional month. We're starting to feel like spring sometimes. And, the arc any day, this could happen this month, could happen, next month. We'll start seeing some blue wings. I've definitely been down there a couple seasons ago and had blue wings in March. So it's right around the corner to start seeing those first blue wings on the freestones. Obviously the Yampa had some the other day on the tailwater. So. And then streamers, I like to fish really sparse patterns in the wintertime. So usually single hook flies, I feel like they get down a little bit quicker. Little Kim is one of them. The meat whistle, probably one of my favorite flies, just because it casts really easy. It's heavy, gets down to the fish, and it looks better in the water than it does in the bin. So Peanut Envy, that is a double articulated fly, but it's very easy to cast, very sparse, sinks real fast. Rusty Trombone, also another double articulated, as well as the Goldie, and those are going to be brown, purple, I think, and then Peanut Envy comes in multiple different colors. Rusty Trombone's kind of in a olive, and then Goldie's like a white. Swim Coach, a super cool pattern. We've been, I think, came out from Umpqua last year. Double articulated as well, but very easy cast, sinks real well. And then you really can't go wrong with Crelix. Super easy to cast, sinks well, flashy. It's by far probably, if I could pick one, it would probably be that Crelix. And then rigging, guys. In the wintertime, nymphing is going to be your priority way to fish usually. So I'm going to do a double or a triple nymph rig. We were doing triple the other day. I was doing triple. It was fine. I think we did some doubles too. Dry fly, single dry, double dry, and even double dry with a sunken emerger as your second fly. I highly recommend. Last presentation I did on this, people are asking about dry droppers. End of March, you can probably start thinking about dry droppers. You're not going to get very eats on the chubbies, but you can definitely get, if you're doing a really long one with a Pats and something else, you might be able to catch some fish. The biggest problem I have with double dry, big chubby droppers in the wintertime is the dry fly tends to, if it's cold, it will ice up. It'll just grab water and freeze up, and then it doesn't really do you a good favor. So most of the time I'm using as a bobber, a thingamabobber, or an airlock, just because it doesn't ice up. And then rigging for streamers, single fly, like I said, like a single easy to cast fly, sparse pattern with weight that sinks fast. And then a lot of times, whether or not you want a sinking leader or line, I'm not fishing streamers a ton in the winter, not for probably another month. But when I start fishing streamers, I'll have a dedicated streamer rod. So a lot of times I won't have one this time of year. And if somebody says a streamer, so I'll change it up. So I won't have sinking line. I'll probably just have a sinking leader and have to add some split shot. And then presentation, nymphing. So you want to fish those deeper, slower holding water. Pretty much in the wintertime, you're not moving a ton. You're finding a deep hole and run, and you're hanging there and trying to figure out where those fish are and where you need to stand to catch those fish. So I'm a lot of times showing up at a spot and moving up and down and figuring out with the flow, where I should stand, and trying to pinpoint the best spot. You start catching a few fish, because a lot of times those fish are kind of packed in one area. They don't want to work too hard. They're hanging out. It's winter. It's cold. And so trying to find that certain area and that certain drift, a lot of times will put a lot more fish into the boat. So I'm moving very little. I'll move within the hole, but I won't move from hole to hole very often. I'm not walking a ton of water. I'll definitely will, but usually after I've exhausted one hole. And then find that top or middle portion of that hole. So you're going to find that top and try to get those flies really hitting that middle and maybe swinging towards the end. But that's really what I'm looking for. One of my presentations is slackline nymphing technique, and that's basically finding that middle or that top and casting upstream, possibly into the riffles, really just to get that presentation right. And then it's going to float to you, and then you're going to do an upstream stack mend and a little bit of a J in the line, and you're going to actually have some slack line. Then you're going to shake that line out. I like to say paint a Z or a Z on the water, or a zigzag. And then basically you're going to let that zigzag straighten out as it goes below you. It's a little harder to set the hook, but a lot of times without that extra zigzag in there, you're not going to get those flies straight down. And to me, that's the most important part. And a lot of times I'll be on that upper part as opposed to the middle part of that hole, so I can get that flies basically the drift right at me or a little below me. So what we want to do is get that zigzag in there as it's coming to you, and then, or J and then zigzag as it's coming to you. Be ready for that strike right when it's about you or just a little below you. The zigzag is basically so you can get a float well below you to the end of the drift. Good technique on the Dream Stream. Does really well because you're sitting on those bender holes. And a lot of times if you're up high, you still got some water below you. But also on the Arkansas, many of those holes, that's just one of the techniques that I'm going to use, especially in these holes that are deeper and bigger, like the tailwater at the Yampa. It's such a small stream. It really wasn't something that we were using a lot. So again, you can pick up fish anywhere in the drift. As the day warms up, you'll get them in the riffles sometimes. So be ready for that as soon as that cast lies or lands. And then you can get them as it's coming to you, right at you, or even below you. So it's a good technique to catch fish throughout that whole area of the hole. And then just keep remembering where you're picking up fish and try to hit that spot again. Maybe not every cast, but try to remember where you're getting those fish. Again, those hook sets take a little time to get used to because you got to pick up a lot of that extra line. But again, the way I tell this to people is you might not get many strikes without doing this technique. So something to try. It's one of my favorite winter techniques for nymph fishing. Highly recommend it. So give it a shot out there and see if you like it. Presentations for the dry flies. So I'm looking for fish midday and usually on those slower holes. This is again that day where we caught a ton of fish. You can see that little ice edge there. You might even be able to see a few fish rising in that photo. So just, looking at those slower holes, keeping an eye out, listening if you hear those, fish rising. And then you're going to pinpoint those rising fish. A lot of times fishing a double dry is the easiest to do as far as to see your other small dry. So a small or a larger parachute Adams, like a size 18 maybe, and then a size 22, 24 Brooks Sprout Midge, or even a parachute Adams again. And that first dry fly is just helping you find that other one. So good technique. But a lot of times in the winter times, I find that these fish are a little spookier. And so sometimes fishing a single dry, if you can see it, it might help a little better. And then you can always use those high vis options too. And there's plenty out there. So check out those. Got high vis Griffiths Gnats and parachute Adams. And in those smaller size, that sure can help you see it. So presentations for the dry fly, slack line nymphing technique can work, especially for fish that are downstream of you. But a lot of times I'm still fishing upstream. That slack line technique is only really used for maybe down and all the way and across the other side of the stream. So I'm not using that technique as much. Really most of the time looking upstream. And then fishing presentations for streamers. everybody likes to fish the banks when you're streamer fishing, but fish might not be on the banks. So I'm always looking for the deep holding water, lurky banks, more mending and stack mending in the water to get those flies down. So, you know, hit that bank, throw a mend, really try to get those flies sinking, and then slow retrieves with some slow hesitations too. And then something always to think about is to try a dead drift. A lot of times people forget about it. We also mentioned earlier that leeches, you know, almost a little bit of a, can be a little bit of a streamer. And so dead drifting a leech in the wintertime it's a deadly technique. Sometimes you could even move that leech even with a nymphing rig. So also an interesting thing. And if all of a sudden you're getting fish eating the moving leech, maybe you throw a streamer for the day. So good techniques to think about. And that's really, guys, that's it. That's the presentation. That was actually a faster one. So if anybody's got questions. Any questions? Yeah,
Thanks, Zeke.
you betcha, Ashley.
I do have a question about, can you talk a little bit more about, maybe you can, I'm not sure, protecting the fish, you know, making sure that you're caring for the fish as much as possible in the winter? Are there concerns or issues there with cold weather?
For sure, I would say more than anything, just not keeping them out of the water, because they sure can freeze, you know. So just like if your net's freezing, so that trout. So, you know, I'm doing my best to keep them in the water, and then as much as possible in the net, you know, in the net, holding that net in the water, keeping it in the water on release, you know, taking the hooks out of there. Long handled nets are great too, guys, because you can use them for, you know, pinch your legs or on your arm while you're releasing, and to keep that, instead of pulling that net completely out of the water or putting them on icy bank. You know, it's tough with the colder water and weather and hands, but that's the biggest thing I would say is just release those fish a little bit sooner. You don't want to grip and grin in the wintertime anyways, usually, unless it's a really nice fish, because your hands are going to get freezes anyway. So a lot of times, you know, I'm just telling people to try to release them as soon as possible. And, you know, the one nice thing is that it's not warm temperatures. So these fish do have a little bit of spunk in them. So, you know, you're not fighting them as long probably in the winter either. So, you know, it's keep them in the water, but also they're healthy in the wintertime.
And then I know it's not popular, but I take my gloves off when I'm touching the fish.
Yes, most definitely. And I think I mentioned that earlier. You know, take those gloves off and just barehanded that, because it's putting wet gloves or getting your gloves wet from handling a fish is not going to treat you well the rest of the day. Not to mention your gloves will start stinking.
Yeah, and you're taking the slime off of the fish.
Most definitely.
And then the other question I had is, can you speak a little bit to how to do that hook set when you have so much line out? I mean, are you pulling the line?
You can pull the line. I mean, you definitely can. You know, so sometimes you'll incorporate a couple strips in there, but really it's just a big lift. Yeah. And I always tell people, like a lot of times, if your rod tip is horizontal with the water, and as long as it's not real high, if you're, you know, we're not high sticking in the winter usually. So at least in this scenario, we're not. So your rod tip's down. And if you lift that 9-foot rod, you're going to lift a lot of line. So you just got to do it fairly quickly. And then you very quickly will figure out, oh, I didn't move that. And I didn't move enough line. I didn't move the indicator. And that's when you give that strip. Because all you really need to see, and I think we've all seen this probably when you're fishing, you're either setting way too much, when all you really need to do is move the flies and feel what's at the end of the flies. And so you don't necessarily need to, you know, yank those flies out of the water. They don't need to come out of the water every time. So as long as you're moving those flies from the bottom and feeling what's there, that's the key.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, Zeke,
Yeah.
Rick Dornfeld here.
I read.
I'm interested in some more information on the restored reaches on the Upper Blue and
Yeah.
on the Swan.
Yeah,
I think you said the Swan restored reach is open now,
it is.
and the Upper Blue reach from Airport Road down to 4 Mile Bridge is not yet open.
Not yet.
So what's the status on that?
Well, first of all, the Swan is going to be frozen in the wintertime, so it won't be open until the spring. I am not 100% sure on the status on that. It's like re-vegging. I think they just finished most of it last year, so it's probably going to be at least another, I bet you they open it next spring. That would be something to look on Summit County's website, because that's definitely Summit County, a Summit County project.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. I see the signs, otherwise I know it's closed. It's just,
Zeke, I had a question from the chat from Don Davenport.
yeah.
Don, do you want to just unmute yourself and ask him? I don't see Don. It's me on page 2.
Ed, I have a question for Zeke.
Okay.
Zeke, what's your go-to color on your bling midge?
Bling midge, I like the black or the cream. Probably the cream.
So the lighter, okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's just a cool pattern because it's kind of like a miracle, but it's got the black head and it's got that little flash. It's
Right.
definitely a great tailwater fly.
All right,
Thank-
Don, do you want to ask your question, Don, or should
Yeah,
I read it?
Well, can you hear me now, Ed?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, sorry. So Zeke has a great presentation. How does one best find out if you want to run a drift boat on a stretch of river, pick a stretch like from below Glenwood, say, to whatever the next takeout is that's not frozen? How's the best way to find out if you can take a boat down a stretch of river in the winter without getting caught someplace where the ice is packed up and you can't get through?
Right. So, below Glenwood, Two Rivers boat ramp is open, but like South Canyon usually closes because of it's kind of hidden in the shade. So you don't want to try to do that section. I mean, sometimes calling the shuttle services, they'll be able to tell you that, or calling the local fly shop. You can always call me. That's, call the fly shop here, and we can definitely tell you what we know. That's always a great one. But as far as anything, most of the time, again, look at that Glenwood Springs cam, make sure it's not super ice flow. If it's 8 degrees in Newcastle, or, it's going to be a tough day probably. So, or overnight, even 8 degrees. So, I mean, you can pretty much, it'll clear at some point. I've definitely had those days, but you're going to be dealing with ice flow until the middle of the day. But for the most part, anything below South Canyon, you're pretty good all the way down to silt. If you get down to the Rifle area, that some of that bank ice starts creeping out, but we only got a couple more weeks of that, and then it's going to start receding, and we're going to be on full on float fishing time. So it's not far off. I would say the biggest thing you want to keep away from in the winter is South Canyon. Other than that, as long as you're not floating above Glenwood, you're pretty good to go. As far as a drift boat goes, it's low right now. I mean, I'm taking a drift boat, but it's the lowest it's been in a while. So, look at those flows. If it gets below 1,200, it starts getting technical down there. So you just got to keep your eyes out for sliding and rocks. And, even one of the rapids there right above Newcastle, I've been hearing that people were walking their boats down. I mean, I think it's runnable, but that's just me. So
Got to be careful if it's not private land.
yeah, that's public right there, that rapid.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
runs the cameras? I mean, is that US?
Yeah, that's golly, I can look. It's